There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Connecting Mamas. And I am so excited to have Rachel here today because I met her at the World Religions Parliament. And what really dragged, sorry, my delay always goes on YouTube. I don't know what happened. Anyways, back to the present moment. But I had the pleasure of meeting Rachel, and I had the pleasure of also going to her workshop where I learned so much about belonging and the ways that we can do it. And so I wanted to bring her on here because I think that is one of the key elements to connection, is really figuring out what that means, how we do it, and all that. So let me tell you a little bit about Rachel. Rachel combines passion and experience with helping individuals and organizations grow and thrive. She brings professional expertise in individuals and leadership coaching, HR strategy, employee experience, talented development, positive psychology applied to individuals and organizations, and sustainable change. This expertise has come from 20 years plus of experience in both corporate world of the auto industry and tech startups, as well as individual coaching, nonprofit consulting, and community leaders. Welcome, Rachel. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Nice. It's good to be here.
And I just want to dive right in. Well, actually, I kind of want to start right away because we were talking before we got on this call about authenticity. And I just love this because I was like, we were talking about, like, I usually don't blow dry my hair very much, but I actually did blow dry my hair, but I didn't straighten it. I didn't do anything. All I did was blow dry it this morning and put on a shirt. And my neighbor looks at me and goes, "You look really good today." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, do I always look this bad?" Then Rachel came on here, and Ellie can share what it's had to say.
Oh, yeah. Well, my kids usually are just like, oh, your hair is down. It's not in a ponytail. Something's going on today, right? What's going on today? But for me, it's really important to have that authenticity, right? Because, you read the bio, you do all the things, and we put up these kind of stories of who we are. But the reality is I am much more than that, right? And there's so many aspects of who I am, and how I look in one given moment or what I'm doing doesn't capture the full story of who I am. And that's really at the center of belonging, right? Is it really is about allowing people to be in a space with all of who they are, which includes, we don't always have our best moments, right? It includes kind of that forgiveness and that mercy for those moments that aren't our best moments. So I try to do that in everything I do. Being authentic doesn't mean that I never have my hair down or anything, but there are moments that I don't, like this morning.
No, I just love that so much. But I think that is what stops a lot of moms from, like, coming into these situations or seeking a community or something, thinking they have to come a certain way. And so that's why I love having you on here and just being totally honest about all this stuff, because that's what this is all about. It's like breaking, as you said, that barrier that we have. And I think that need of belonging is part of that. Is, I know for myself, I had spent so much time trying to belong to groups or stuff that I kept doing things that I didn't necessarily feel. At the moment, I didn't even quite even realize it. All I knew is that I had tension in my stomach. I wasn't, like, feeling quite right in the situation, but I didn't really know what to make of it. Now I know it was me trying to be someone else from who I was because I wanted to belong so badly. So how do you help people figure that out in them?
Well, there's so many things that go into it. It can be a little bit tough, but for me, the foundation and the first thing to realize is that belonging is not about conformity, which is counter culture to what we've been taught our whole lives, right? You need to belong, you need to fit in. It starts in elementary school, junior high. I'm seeing my kids go through it now, right? Is that I need to be like others, or I need to find others who are like me. And the reality is that's false, because there is no one that's just like you, right? Even when you think that someone is a lot like you, and they might be a lot like you, your experiences are different. The ways that you see the world are still different. And there's a lot of richness that we pass by in trying to find conformity and belonging through conformity, rather than saying, I want belonging where people know and understand all of who I am. But that's hard. It's very vulnerable too, right? There's a real reason why we don't go after that a lot of the time. It requires work and it requires courage, right? But there are a lot of things we can do to practice that, right? So I always start with just recognizing that, right? Belonging is not about conformity. And are you willing to step into that space, right? And let's start with the journey of recognizing, what is it that I need to do internally to be willing to step into the space of belonging?
Do you have any suggestions on where to start with that, like on how to get into that internal process?
Yeah. So in the work that I do, people come in and they say, okay, we're going to create belonging. So I'm going to learn, really, most people come in and say, I'm going to learn how to make other people think like me. Right.
Oh my gosh, that's so true.
That's
So
how
that's
we're
the
going to do
easiest way to
this.
belong.
Right. But most of the work starts with saying, what is my story? Like, do I really truly understand my story and who I am and what's led me to be who I am today, as well as who I want to be in the future? And that in and of itself, that step can take a long time, right? We don't often spend a lot of time on our stories. And there's power also in crafting and recognizing your story, because most of the time I have a story in my head and it might not be accurate, right? So for me, I just remember this moment when I paused my career at Ford Motor in HR when I had my first child. It was a little bit later in life, and I knew I was going to have a few kids really quickly. So I made a decision to pause. But as I did that, right, and now I'm at home, and I'm like, okay, I have 3 babies under 4, and like, who am I anymore? I don't even know who I am, right? And in one of those moments, it just kind of hit me like, wait a minute, I'm still who I've always been, right? So why do I think that there's this different story? Like, what is the story of who I am? It's not being an HR manager at Ford, right? It's not all the titles or the other things that I thought it was before. And yet internally, I know that I still am who I have been. And in fact, I know that I've grown, but I just don't know what that story is, right? So I had to spend time saying, what is that story? Who am I? And how can I still be that person, even though my circumstances have changed, right? Because who I was didn't change.
I mean, you put the like nail on the head right there. Honestly, like that's what Connecting Mamas is all about. Is that's what led me start my story in this business, was like, I'm at home. Who am I anymore? Am I? And for me, it was like, I'm just a mom. Like I was staying at home, wasn't working anymore. And that was, again, the story I was telling myself is this is who I am. And I should be grateful. I should feel great for all these things. But at the same time, they're just, every time like you're doing the dishes or something, it's like, is there more? And you're like, no, I can't think that. Like, this was the Disney end. This was a story. Like I have my happily ever after now. Like I should have these thoughts or these feelings. And that's what led me to even want to do this. Cause I know we're not alone in this. Like we all
Yep.
have these feelings. So as women are having these feelings, what steps should they start to take?
Yeah, like I said, part of it is figuring out what are the aspects of who I am, right? And there's lots of different ways to do that. Some of it can just be, if you're a writer, start writing your story, right? Noticing all the things that were significant in getting you to where you are. If you're not a writer, because we're not all writers, right? It might be trying to do something simple. So one of the things that I did for me was to say, okay, many times in our culture, especially here in the US, we think that identity is tied to these labels that we have, right? Like the title that I have at a job, or right. The first question that we ask is, what do you do? And that's where we come
Yes.
back to that. Oh, I'm just a mom. Like, I don't know what else to say, right? I don't get paid by anybody. I don't, right? So for me, it was crafting that who am I kind of as a title. So I take the slash approach, right? So for me, it's not going to be a title of a job, but what are all the different aspects of who I am? So I ended up saying, okay, I'm a mom. I'm a nerd. I'm still a nerd, even though I only get to learn about kids things, right? For a moment. Now I get to spend more time on it, but I'm a nerd. I'm an athlete, even though I don't get to play things all the time. That's still who I am, right? I still try to do that. I'm a coach. I'm a consultant, right? So I started writing kind of these slashes of all the things that I am. And then I had to embrace, okay, am I willing to tell this story? Like if somebody asks me, what do you do? Is this what I'm going to answer with? Or do I still feel like I need to just say I'm a mom? Right. And it was really
I
awkward at
love
first.
that.
Right. Because
You're like making me think so much right now.
well, and it can be awkward because what do you do? And I started saying, I'm a mom, I'm a nerd, an athlete, I do coach consulting. They're like, okay, wait, but what's your job? I'm like, all those things. Nobody pays me, but those are all my job, right? In different ways. And what that led me to was, okay, if this is who I am, how am I doing that right now? And how I do it right now will look different than it did before, right? Earlier in my life. And it'll look different than it will 5 years from now, right? But it still can be who I am. I just have to figure out what that looks like in the here and now.
okay, I just have to take a pause. So I was like, wow. It just made me think, because you're right when you're saying, I love the part where you just said, can you tell that story? Because again, or you can say, I'm just a mom. Like, do you have the strength enough to say that out loud, or is it going to make you just retract? Because I feel like when I get asked, I'm like I'm biting my tongue. I'm an entrepreneur, and I kind of look down, like I don't know if I can quite do it yet. And I love that you're
Right.
saying that, but it's like that practice and making that muscle. Like there are more aspects to you, and I'm like, I used to be a teacher. Like I like those are like the things that you answer and just the way you talk about it, but that really shapes how you see yourself a lot.
Mhm. It does. And we could be afraid to claim those aspects of ourselves for many different reasons, right? Sometimes in seeking a space of belonging, we're afraid to claim it because we're not sure ourselves if that's really us, right? And that's the aspect of claiming our own story. Sometimes we're afraid to claim that because we're afraid of how other people react to that, right? And how they will view it. And so many times the step is, well, why am I afraid to claim that? And it might differ in different situations, right? And if I'm at home with lots of little kids, it might be that I'm anticipating someone's going to say, well, you don't have a job, so how are you? All those things, right? That could be that. In other situations, we might be afraid to claim it because someone else is going to react because they think it's something different than how we define it, right? There's lots of things that can make us afraid to claim that. But sorting through those and kind of addressing and confronting our fears about it can help us to know, where do I need to do that work, right? Is that work within myself and how I view myself? Is that work in how I interact with other people? Right? Is it in understanding how I live out my values in my life today? Where do I need to focus next? Because a lot of times the obstacle is going to be within ourselves and how we interact with others, right? And the type of relationship we're looking for with others.
I love how you say that it'll be like inside ourselves, because again, 99% of the time it really is usually within us, and we like to look outside and put the blame on someone else, but we really can't make changes unless we take ownership for what is ours. So like for me, like right now as I'm listening to, it's like, yeah, let me take ownership for the identity that I'm not sure about, and like really focus on like, what do I want to say to people? Because I have recently, like I want to say in the last couple months, said entrepreneur. Like it's like I think it's because I'm looking at my husband, as you said, like who are you looking at? He's like, oh, not yet. Kind of like but it's that judgment from others that can hold us back from being who we are, or telling our own story, because it doesn't have to be his story, it's my story. So I need to decide for myself to own it. As you were saying, I think that leads us back to this idea of belonging, because I'm afraid that something's being taken away, that belonging or something, if I own this.
Right. And at the core of that is, again, that we think belonging is either about conformity or it's about acceptance of we're enough, right? But really at its core, creating a space of belonging is where every person is needed, no matter where they are in their journey, right? It's the recognition that each one of us is a child of God, is the way that we talk about it, right? But that each one of us has common humanity and is needed and is valued, even if they are in the worst spot of their life, right? Even if it seems like everything is falling apart, they are needed because they do have something to offer, right? And it's creating that kind of space, which can be hard, right? Because the key is that we are all in the same space of saying, oh, do you think I'm enough? Oh, what do you think about me? Oh, really? Can I trust you with myself? Right? That's the question that we continually ask. And so we have to be willing to step into it and say, okay, I'm going to try to trust you with me. Will you do the same? And can we work on trusting each other together? Right. And that's how we create a space of belonging. But that feels really dangerous to all of us as we first started. Right. So it requires some people who are willing to start that, right? And willing to offer it and say, I know that I'm not perfect, but I really want you here, not because you're perfect, right? And not because you know everything, but because you're needed with who you are.
As one thing that popped in my head right now is just, I want to hear a little bit more about the project that you've undergone in this whole aspect, which like kind of just led me down this hole of like, why know more about what you do, because I was just so intrigued by it.
Yeah. So it started with a whole lot of people here in the Detroit area saying, hey, this was during the time of, the elections that were really fraught with contention and contempt and everything that's happened since then. So it started with people saying, we are so divided. How do we bring people together again? And I'll be upfront in the way that conversation started with most people was, oh, none of those people care about anybody anymore. We need to go teach them how to care. Right? That's how we tend to approach things. And so as I got involved in these conversations, we started down the path of education, of understanding that the way to bring people together is not to tell them that they need to care, because it has the assumption underlying it that something's wrong with them, right? And so the way past this and the way to create belonging is not about what I call outside inside change, which is I'm going to force or create or coerce change for you. It's inside outside change of we're going to create this space as I change. And as I change and I am willing to come together with you and understand my own story and understand your story, then we can create a space of belonging. And then we can actually move towards co-creating a future together, because that's the end that we're looking for in this program, is learning how to co-create something together. And right now what we see is we typically debate about the solutions, right? And we're saying, no, do this. And we're just trying to coerce and force other people to do things the way that we think they should be done. But the foundation for sustainable change, what we find in the research, is bringing people together with an understanding of everyone's needs and finding solutions that are different that actually help everyone fulfill their needs, right? So when we talk about sustainable needs, there could be solutions that are singular, which fulfill just one need, right? So an example would be, hey, my kids need food. Well, the answer is that they need food, right? I got to give them some kind of food to eat. And then we have solutions that are destructive, which if I think about feeding my kids food, okay, they also have a need of being healthy. So if I'm feeding them food and I say, okay, well, I'm just going to give you candy because that will get you full and get you not asking for food, that's then going to be destructive to the need to be healthy, right? So it does matter the solution that we pick. What we want to do is understand everyone's needs so we can find synergistic solutions, which say, here's a solution that fulfills your need. And at the very least, it doesn't destroy my ability to find my needs. Hopefully, it also helps me to fulfill my needs, right? The challenge being that takes a lot more work, right? And it takes time to really see each other, to hear each other, to value each other, to spend the time saying, we need a solution that none of us have thought of, right? So the program that we do and that we developed is helping people learn that basic foundation of how do I come to create a space of belonging. So it's all about storytelling. It's about understanding our own story and the values that lie behind our stories, and then being able to talk about those values and explain those values and how we live them out, because we can live out values, the same values, in different ways, right? We might both value family, and the way that I live that out can be different than the way that you live that out, right? And so though we look very different from the outside with our actions and our behaviors, at the values level, we are very similar, and we can find ways to connect and collaborate together at a values level. And then we ask groups, so these are small, diverse groups, right? We ask them to decide how do they want to move forward together. Are they ready to engage in collaborating together and co-creating something? Most of the time we find that they're not quite ready yet. They still need to learn about each other's needs and the needs in the community. And they still need to practice how do we have those conversations to understand needs on specific topics, right? So we ask them to create a plan that says, here's our journey of how we're going to continue to learn and move towards co-creating a future together in the community. So it's an 8-week program that then is followed by a year of people learning and practicing and experiencing in a small group. How do we do this together? And the hope and the impact that we look for is I've learned the skills, right? So it doesn't mean that I'm going to change the world at the end of this program, but if I've learned how to create that space of belonging that's based on everyone coming with all of who they are, then it'll have ripple impacts all across my life, right? Then that person that I disagreed with and I never wanted to talk to again, I might go back and say, oh, maybe I don't understand where they're coming from and I don't understand their needs, and I can go now have a conversation with them. And maybe we can create something different together, right?
I love that. But it's like when we're communicating, a lot of times we're just communicating, like waiting for our turn to speak or getting our point across. We're not listening for understanding. And I love that you use that word, because really, when we're truly listening to someone, we should be listening to understand that person, not worrying about what we're saying, but worried about more questions and making sure that we're reiterating what they're saying and understanding what they're saying. Is kind of like with you right now. I'm like making sure I'm getting this all in, which is why I want to ask, like, how are these groups picked or structured? Because you said they're small groups, and like, is there diverse opinions in there, or how this work in trying to create this belonging?
Yeah, so it really depends on the organization or the sponsor that wants to create these bridges, because it is focused on building specific bridges, right? So for example, you might say, hey, we know that we have tension between these two communities in our organization. So let's build a bridge there. So in that case, we would focus specifically on having diversity of opinion and experience, of gender, of often it's socioeconomic and faith background as well, can be pieces there, race and ethnicity, obviously. So we identify what are the aspects of diversity that are most important to building this bridge of belonging in this circumstance. And then we ask, who are going to be the natural bridge builders that will help to bring others in? Because not everyone's going to jump on board, right? I mean, it is a space that feels a little vulnerable at first. So we ask, who are the people that are going to help bring others in, that are already a little bit of natural bridge builders? And we start there, right? And connect the bridge builders together, and then start bringing others in that are within their network. So the model can be a little bit different. Sometimes it's an organization or a university that sponsors it. Sometimes it is a community group where the faith groups in the area or other groups say, we know that these two groups need to come together, or we know that there's tension here and we need to help resolve that.
And how do you feel that the conversations and things have gone since these groups? What changes have you seen?
Yeah, the number one change that we see from people is they say, oh, well, I'm not judging everybody like I was before, right? And oh, there's a whole lot more commonality here than I would have thought, right? And they start to have those conversations that they were avoiding before, right? So they'll come back and say, yeah, there's this one person that we just disagree on politics, or we disagree on something, and I just avoided them because I just knew it was going to be a bad conversation. And they said, I think maybe I'm ready to go ask them about why they think the way that they do. And they go and ask them, and they come back and say, I still don't agree with them, but I understand why they think the way that they do. And I think there are some things we can work on together in that, right? So those small things are really the huge impact. Over time, we'll see more of the community impact, right? But that takes time. And sometimes it's hard for us to stick with it when we don't get the immediate huge results.
Isn't that always the case, right? It's like, it's sticking with it is really the key to anything, right? Especially those moms out there watching this right now, is those dreams, those ideas that you have inside of you, that's your story inside of you that needs to come out, and to start identifying that. So me finally admitting I'm an entrepreneur. And part of
Yay!
that is part of my story now. Like, I'm adding to my story that I'm not just a mom. I am a mom and a very good mom at that. But that we start to take accountability for the things that we are, and not even accountability, but also celebrate who we are. And I think that's part of it is, and so a lot of that is in these conversations, in these connections, is what really brings that out. And so it's really, community does bring that out in us. And so I want to encourage you, to those of you listening to this that feel inspired by it, to reach out to Rachel or myself or a different organization, but it's in the community and in having those conversations that this really comes forth. So I know we're starting to run out of time a little bit, so I didn't know if you want to give any final words of wisdom, and also tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're talking, one of the biggest things that you can start practicing today is when somebody starts to tell you a little bit, is you just stop. You stop whatever you were doing, whatever you were going to say, you stop and you say, oh, tell me more about that. What does that mean for you? Why does that mean so much to you, right? Like if you're to say, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, instead of going off in the, oh, how are you an entrepreneur? In kind of the judgment, right? You say, oh, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And right, how are you living that out? Like, what's the story behind that? And where do you see that going? It's that curiosity and that leaning into, somebody has a story here and there's something that I can learn from them. And so let's stop and take a moment, 2 minutes to learn something, right? Because there's so much that I can learn from every single person that I meet. And so there's lots more, and you saw some of those, lots more kind of ground rules and skills that are involved in that. But the number one is like stop and ask questions and listen. But if people do want to learn more about those ground rules, my website is myvitalitysource.com. And there's information about the program on there, the Bridging to Belonging program, or they can email me at rlgc.vitality@gmail.com. But anything that people want to learn about belonging, right? And how do I do this in my life today? Because it's so important. I'm open to questions or things that people are looking for.
I love that. I think just the way to really end this is that lean in, is that we lean into each other, and that person, whoever's in front of you for whatever reason, was put to you to be in front of you at that moment. Give them your time. Simple as that. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for coming on today, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
See you all later.